Nut butters are considered a great alternative to dairy butter. But in my opinion, nut butters serve much more than that. Nut butters are a very efficient way of getting a lot of fat in at one time. And many people would say, oh, isn't that too much of fat? Or is it so good to have peanut butter or almond butter? So let me remind you that a bowl of peanuts results in maybe a teaspoon or max a tablespoon of oil. And without even realizing it, we consume 1 or 2 or 3 tablespoons a day in our day's food. But when we look at a bowl of peanuts and we see peanut butter made out of it, it immediately strikes us that, oh, isn't this too much fat? But we have to realize when fat is in its full form with the fiber, it's actually good for us compared to refined oil or cold pressed oil. So let's move to how to make peanut butter. So these are raw peanuts. They have a nice pinkish skin. They are unsalted, just raw. And these are peanuts after roasting. So to roast, you can either do it in a kadhai, but you have to keep stirring it. So keep that in mind that if you're using a kadhai, you can't leave it aside. You have to keep stirring. Or you can do it in an oven. Usually it takes about 12 to 15 minutes for any nut to roast. And the way to know that your nut is roasted is either the skin will crack, like in a peanut, the skin will crack a bit. They'll become fragrant, and some of them will also have like oil emitting from them. This process makes it easier to release the oil from the nut and also enhances the flavor. So for all nuts, it's the same thing, roast in either a kadhai or in the oven. The time would vary depending on your oven and also depending on the nut. The smaller the nut, the lesser time it would take. So after they are roasted, we take them whole. We do not take off the skin. We use them as it is and we put it straight into the blender. We would now use a chutney grinder to make a nut butter. That's the most efficient way of doing it. So let's begin. So now we start with making the peanut butter. So the thing to remember, which is very, very important while making the nut butter, any nut butter, is to not keep your mixer on continuously. This is very taxing for the motor. So it's a good idea to blend for about 30 seconds, pause for 10 seconds or 15 seconds and then continue. So stop, start is a good method. Otherwise your motor will burn out and you'll end up having to buy a new mixer. So the first stage will just be very finely powdered peanuts. It will become very finely ground. Then we keep at it. The other thing to remember with nut butters is to decide on the quantity. So it shouldn't be too much that it's filled to the top, and it shouldn't be too less because otherwise there's not enough to move around. So a good idea would be to go halfway through your jar, and every time you take a pause, press down with a spatula like this. So our peanut butter is ready. It just takes a little bit of time, love and patience, and I think it's always worth it because when you buy store-bought peanut butter or any nut butter, they usually have oil, salt, some sort of sweetener or a spice. Now this nut butter is completely clean. It only has peanuts. So that's the same if you would make almond butter or any other butter. It should just contain a pulverized version of that nut. Now, this is the same process you would use for making a seed butter as well. Examples of seed butter would be pumpkin, melon, sesame. So you can make sesame butter, pumpkin butter, melon butter. So just roast them and then grind them in a small chutney grinder and you would get your seed butter. The only difference would be for coconut butter. For coconut butter, you don't need to roast. You need to use desiccated coconut, not dry coconut or fresh coconut. And without roasting, you just add it to the chutney grinder and keep going. And in a few minutes, you'll have coconut butter. So that's the process. Now, when it comes to storage of how to store it, it's best in a glass jar in your fridge. In some places it lasts well outside the fridge as well, but to be on the safe side, it's best to put it in the fridge. Each time you use the nut butter, it would be good to use a dry spoon. If your kids like it and put wet fingers into it, then it's going to catch mold. The shelf life of a nut butter is pretty long, in spite of the fact that there is no oil or any other additives added to it. Mine lasts for a good 1 month because I have multiple ones in my fridge. But if you're making one at a time, I would say don't make large batches, make small batches so you can enjoy a variety of butters. So when one gets over, you can make another one. But in terms of shelf life, they have a really long shelf life. In fact, 2-3 months is not a problem in the fridge. So this nut butter is plain, it is not flavored. So whenever you're making a recipe, depending on what you want, if you're making a salad dressing and you want to add some herbs, some garlic, some salt or jaggery, that's up to you. So that's another advantage of keeping the nut butters plain. They not only last longer, they remain versatile, so you can combine it and use it the way you like.